Woman dies in crash, sees humanity's fate in 2070? Shocking NDE. The car spun out of control, its tires screeching against the wet pavement as the driver's frantic attempts to steer were no match for the force of the collision. The world blurred for Jessica, her breath stolen by the violent impact. The last thing she saw before the darkness claimed her was the shattered glass glittering like stars against the night sky. Then silence. It wasn't the silence of a quiet room or a still night. It was a profound, consuming void, the kind that pressed against her from all sides. She was no longer in her body, and yet she was aware of a strange weightlessness and an overwhelming sense that she was moving, though there was no wind, no direction she could perceive. "Where am I?" she tried to say, but no sound came out. Her voice, her body, her sense of self felt distant, as though she had shed her physical being like an old coat. From the void emerged a light, faint at first, then growing steadily brighter. It wasn't a harsh or blinding light, but one that seemed to radiate warmth and familiarity. Jessica felt herself drawn toward it, her fear ebbing with each passing moment. She didn't walk, she simply moved as though carried by an unseen force. As the light engulfed her, the void dissolved, replaced by a vast expanse that defied her understanding. She stood, or perhaps floated, in a place that seemed both endless and immediate, filled with colors and sounds she couldn't name. The air, if it could be called air, vibrated with an energy that pulsed through her, resonating in a way that felt deeply personal. "Jessica." The voice was soft yet commanding, not from any single direction but from everywhere at once. It carried a weight that made her pause, her awareness sharpening. "Who's there?" she asked, though she wasn't sure how she was speaking. The words felt more like thoughts projected outward than sounds. The light around her shifted, coalescing into a figure that stood before her, radiant and indistinct. It wasn't human, but its form was familiar enough to put her at ease. Its presence exuded a calmness that seeped into her, even as questions flooded her mind. "You are in the in-between," the figure said, its voice steady and soothing. "Your body remains in the world you know, but your soul has crossed over for a time." Jessica frowned, her thoughts racing. "The crash. Am I dead?" "Not yet," the figure replied. "But you are closer to death than to life." The words sent a shiver through her, but the figure's presence kept her grounded. "Why am I here?" she asked. "What is this place?" "This is a space of understanding," the figure said. "You have been brought here not by chance, but by necessity. There is something you must see." Jessica's chest tightened. "See what?" "Why me?" "You will understand," the figure said simply. "Come." Before Jessica could respond, the space around her began to shift. The vibrant colors faded, replaced by a muted gray that stretched endlessly in all directions. The hum of energy quieted, leaving a stillness that felt heavy and foreboding. The figure moved ahead, and Jessica followed, though she didn't feel her legs moving. The world responded to her intent, bending to her presence. The grayness parted like a curtain, revealing a scene that stopped Jessica in her tracks. She was no longer in the infinite void but standing on a street she didn't recognize. The buildings were tall and angular, their surfaces gleaming with a metallic sheen. The air was thick with a faint haze, and above, the sky was a muted, sickly yellow, as though the sun struggled to penetrate the layers of smog. "What is this place?" Jessica asked, her voice barely a whisper. "This is Earth," the figure replied. "But not as you know it. This is the year 2070. Jessica's breath hitched. 2070? That's impossible. The figure's gaze remained steady. "You are here to witness the consequences of humanity's choices." As Jessica stared, the scene came to life. People moved through the streets, their faces pale and weary. Most wore masks over their mouths, and their movements were hurried, as though the very air around them was hostile. Vehicles that hovered silently above the ground zipped past, their sleek designs clashing with the crumbling infrastructure around them. She noticed something else. There were no children. Everyone she saw was an adult, their faces lined with a fatigue that went beyond physical exhaustion. The streets, though busy, felt devoid of life, as though the people moving through them were merely going through the motions. "This can't be real," Jessica said, shaking her head. What happened? Why is everything like this? The figure gestured toward the sky. The choices made in your time shaped this reality. The disregard for the earth, the endless consumption, the division among people, these have brought the world to this state. Jessica's stomach churned as she took in the details. The crumbling buildings, the grim expressions, the oppressive haze. But there must be something good, she said desperately. Something left to save? The figure didn't respond immediately. Instead, the scene shifted again, revealing a sprawling wasteland on the outskirts of the city. The ground was dry and cracked, dotted with the skeletal remains of trees that had long since withered. In the distance, she saw a group of people scavenging through piles of debris, their movements slow and desperate. These are the survivors, the figure said. Those who refused to give up hope even when the world crumbled around them. Jessica's heart ached as she watched the group, their faces gaunt and their clothes tattered. Among them, she noticed an older man holding a small device, its faint glow illuminating his weathered face. He seemed to be teaching the others, his gestures animated despite the bleakness around him. "Who is he?" Jessica asked, her voice soft. "A leader," the figure replied. "A reminder that even in the darkest times, there are those who fight to rebuild, to inspire, to protect." Jessica's chest tightened. The despair of the city and the wasteland threatened to overwhelm her, but the sight of the man and his determination sparked a flicker of hope. "Is it too late to change this?" she asked. "Is this future inevitable?" The figure turned to her, its radiant presence dimming slightly. "The future is not set. It is shaped by the choices of the present. What you do, what others do, ripples outward, creating paths that lead to light or shadow." Jessica felt tears well up in her eyes. "What can I do? I'm just one person. One person can make a difference," the figure said. "Your choices, your voice, your actions, they matter more than you realize." The wasteland faded, and Jessica found herself back in the gray expanse, her mind racing with what she had seen. The figure stood before her, its light steady and unwavering. "You have been given this glimpse not as punishment, but as a gift," it said. "You will return with the knowledge of what could be. Use it to guide those around you. Inspire them to choose differently." Jessica's breathing quickened. "But how do I make them listen? How do I make them believe?" "Through your actions," the figure said simply. "The truth lies in what you do, not just in what you say." The space around her began to shift again, the grayness dissolving into light. The pull of her body returned, growing stronger with each passing moment. Jessica's heart pounded as she felt herself being drawn back to the world she had left behind. "Remember, Jessica," the figure's voice echoed. "The future is not fixed. It is written with every choice." And with that, the light engulfed her. Jessica's awareness returned slowly, the cold gray of the void receding as a new scene emerged around her. The air was sharp and acrid, filled with the unmistakable scent of burning chemicals. She found herself standing in what appeared to be a sprawling industrial complex, its towering smokestacks belching thick, black smoke into an already murky sky. The sheer scale of it was overwhelming, the machinery stretching as far as the eye could see, grinding and hissing in relentless motion. The figure stood beside her, its presence steady and unshaken by the oppressive surroundings. "This is another layer of the world you must see," it said, its voice calm but tinged with gravity. Jessica looked around, her stomach churning as she took in the sight. Conveyor belts carried mountains of plastic and metal scraps, some disassembled from what looked like household items and vehicles. Workers, clad in tattered uniforms and makeshift masks, moved like shadows among the machines, their faces obscured but their weariness unmistakable. "What is this place?" Jessica asked, her voice catching in her throat. "This is where the remnants of the past are dismantled," the figure replied. "A world created by a society that consumed without thought, leaving behind mountains of waste and broken promises." Jessica's gaze lingered on the workers. Some appeared to be children, their small hands struggling to sort through piles of jagged debris. The scene sent a wave of nausea through her, and she turned to the figure, her chest tightening. "They're just kids," she said, her voice trembling. "Why are they here? Why isn't anyone helping them?" There is no one left to help, the figure said. Resources have been depleted, economies have crumbled, and those in power have long since abandoned the systems that supported the vulnerable. The burden of survival has fallen to those least equipped to bear it. Jessica felt tears sting her eyes as she watched one child stumble, her tiny frame collapsing under the weight of a rusted machine part she had been carrying. A man rushed to her side, lifting her gently and cradling her against his chest. His face was gaunt, his eyes hollow, but his tenderness was unmistakable. "That's her father," Jessica whispered, the realization hitting her like a blow. "He's doing everything he can, but it's not enough." The figure nodded. Even in the bleakest of circumstances, love persists. It is the one constant, the one force that defies even the harshest realities. Jessica turned away, unable to bear the sight any longer. "Why are you showing me this?" she demanded, her voice breaking. "What am I supposed to do with all this pain?" "To understand the weight of your choices," the figure said. "To see the consequences of a world that prioritizes convenience over compassion, profit over people, and consumption over sustainability." The machinery around them roared louder, drowning out her thoughts. Jessica clutched her ears, her knees buckling as the oppressive noise closed in around her. Then, just as suddenly as it had begun, the sound ceased, replaced by a deafening silence. When Jessica looked up, the industrial complex was gone. In its place was a vast, barren wasteland. The ground was cracked and dry, stretching endlessly beneath a sky that seemed perpetually clouded. The air was stifling, carrying the faint metallic tang of ash. Scattered across the wasteland were remnants of a once thriving civilization, the skeletal remains of skyscrapers, rusted vehicles half buried in the ground, and piles of debris that might have once been homes or schools. The desolation was staggering, the emptiness suffocating. "This is what remains," the figure said quietly. "A world stripped of its vitality, its resources, its future." Jessica stumbled forward, her feet crunching against the brittle ground. She approached a shattered window frame sticking out of the dirt, its glass jagged and coated in dust. Beyond it, she saw nothing but endless ruin. "How did it get this bad?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "The seeds were sown long before your time," the figure replied. "But they were watered and tended by apathy, greed, and ignorance. The warnings were ignored, the consequences dismissed as distant or irrelevant." Jessica's fists clenched at her sides. "But people tried to fix it, didn't they? There were activists, scientists, leaders who cared. The figure agreed. But their voices were drowned out by the clamor for convenience, by systems that resisted change in the name of profit. Efforts were made, but they were not enough to stem the tide." Jessica fell to her knees, the weight of the scene pressing down on her. "It feels so hopeless," she said, tears streaming down her face. "Like nothing we do will ever be enough." The figure knelt beside her, its radiant form dimming slightly as it placed a hand on her shoulder. "Hope is never absent, Jessica. It is found in the smallest of actions, the quietest of voices. It is not the absence of difficulty but the persistence to act despite it." Jessica wiped her eyes, her heart heavy. "Then why show me this? If hope still exists, why focus on the destruction, the suffering?" "To understand the stakes," the figure said. "To see the fragility of what you hold dear. Only by facing the consequences of inaction can you find the resolve to choose differently." Jessica nodded slowly, her gaze fixed on the broken landscape. "I'll remember this," she said quietly. "I don't know how, but I'll find a way to make people care." The figure stood, its light growing brighter. "That is your task, Jessica. To carry this vision with you and inspire others to act. The future is not fixed. It is shaped by the choices of those who dare to believe in something better." The wasteland around them began to dissolve, the cracked ground and clouded sky fading into a soft, golden light. The pull of her body returned, faint but insistent, and Jessica felt herself being drawn back to the world she had left behind. As the light enveloped her, the figure's voice echoed one last time. "Remember, Jessica, every action ripples outward. What you do matters." The warmth of the light grew stronger, and the pull intensified. carrying her away from the desolation and back toward the life she thought she had lost. Jessica felt her body moving again, weightless and guided, the golden light giving way to something darker yet not entirely void-like. As the transition settled, she found herself standing in a large chamber that pulsed with an unfamiliar energy. The walls, if they could even be called that, shimmered with a liquid, metallic texture, reflecting fragments of light that seemed to come from nowhere. The air was thick but breathable, vibrating faintly with an underlying hum that resonated in her chest. She looked around, trying to grasp the purpose of this new place. Unlike the industrial complex or the barren wasteland she had seen earlier, this space was clean, pristine even. The surfaces gleamed as though untouched by time or decay, but the stillness felt unnatural, almost eerie. "Where am I now?" Jessica asked, her voice trembling. The radiant figure appeared beside her, its light subdued as if out of respect for the gravity of this place. "You are in what was meant to be a sanctuary," it said. "A creation born from necessity, built to shelter humanity from the chaos above." Jessica frowned, stepping forward. Her footfalls made no sound on the smooth, gleaming floor. "A sanctuary?" she repeated. "You mean people lived here?" "They did," the figure replied. "For a time." Jessica's heart sank as the implications of its words settled over her. She turned slowly, taking in the massive space. Rows of metallic pods lined the walls, their surfaces opaque and featureless. Each one emitted a faint, rhythmic glow, as if something inside still pulsed with life, or the memory of it. "What are these?" she asked, approaching one of the pods cautiously. "Cryogenic chambers," the figure explained. A desperate attempt to preserve what remained of humanity when the surface could no longer sustain life. Those who could afford it placed themselves in stasis, hoping to awaken in a future where the world had healed. Jessica's stomach churned. "And did they wake up, I mean?" The figure was silent for a moment, its form flickering faintly. "Most did not." Jessica's breath caught in her throat. "Why not?" "The systems failed," the figure said simply. The technology, though advanced, was not infallible. Time and neglect eroded its functionality. Only a handful of chambers remain active, their occupants unaware of the world that awaits them. Jessica placed a hand on the nearest pod, its surface cool and smooth under her palm. Her mind swirled with questions, but one rose above the rest. Was this all there was? This sanctuary? "No," the figure replied. "There were others scattered across the globe, but none succeeded in fulfilling their purpose. The collapse of infrastructure and the loss of knowledge rendered them ineffective. Humanity's survival was fragmented, scattered among the remnants of the old world." Jessica felt a lump form in her throat as she stared at the silent pods. Each one represented a life, a story, a hope that had been left behind. "Did they know?" she asked quietly. "The people who went into these chambers, did they know they might never wake up?" "Some did," the figure said. "Others clung to hope, refusing to accept the possibility of failure. It is a testament to humanity's resilience, but also to its hubris." Jessica closed her eyes, her hands still resting on the pod. She tried to imagine the desperation that must have driven these people to seal themselves away, to place their trust in cold machines while the world above crumbled. The thought made her chest ache. "Why show me this?" she asked, her voice breaking. "I already understand the stakes. I've seen the destruction, the suffering. What more am I supposed to learn?" The figure stepped closer, its presence steady but firm. "You must see the full scope of humanity's choices, their triumphs and their failures. This place represents both. It is a monument to ingenuity, but also a reminder of the consequences of short-sightedness." Jessica turned to face the figure, her frustration boiling over. "But what am I supposed to do with all this?" she demanded. "I'm just one person. How can I fix something this broken?" The figure's light dimmed slightly, its voice softening. "It is not about fixing the world, Jessica. It is about inspiring others to act, to choose differently. Change does not come from a single act but from a collective shift in perspective." Jessica's fists clenched at her sides. She wanted to believe the figure's words, but the weight of what she had seen felt insurmountable. How could she, one person among billions, make a difference in a world teetering on the edge of collapse? Before she could voice her doubts, the chamber began to shift. The metallic walls rippled like water, and the hum of the machinery grew louder, almost deafening. Jessica stumbled back, her heart racing as the pods around her flickered, their faint glows dimming one by one. "What's happening?" she cried, panic rising in her chest. "The systems are failing," the figure said calmly. "This is a memory, a fragment of the past preserved for you to witness. It is collapsing because it no longer holds relevance to the present." Jessica's breathing quickened as the chamber dissolved around her, the pods disappearing into the void. She was weightless again, suspended in the in-between space where her journey had begun. The figure remained by her side, its presence a faint comfort amid the disorientation. "What now?" Jessica asked, her voice shaking. "What else do you need to show me?" "There is one more truth," the figure said. "One more perspective you must see before you can understand your role." The space around them began to shift again, the darkness giving way to a new scene. Jessica found herself standing on a rooftop overlooking a city. This city was unlike the desolate, crumbling metropolis she had seen earlier. It was alive, bustling with energy. Skyscrapers towered over the streets below, their surfaces gleaming with solar panels and vegetation. People moved through the streets, their faces bright with purpose and connection. Jessica's heart lifted at the sight. "This is different," she said, her voice filled with awe. "It's beautiful. This is what could be," the figure said. "A world where humanity chose to adapt, to innovate with care and foresight. A world where people prioritized harmony with the earth and each other." Jessica stepped closer to the edge of the rooftop, her eyes scanning the vibrant streets below. She saw children laughing as they played in lush parks, their parents chatting nearby. She saw renewable energy powering the city, its hum barely audible amid the cheerful noise of life. She saw cooperation, kindness, and hope. "How did they do it?" she asked, tears streaming down her face. "How did they turn it all around?" "They chose differently," the figure said simply. "They valued the collective over the individual, the future over immediate gain. It was not easy and it required sacrifice. But it was possible." Jessica turned to the figure, her voice trembling. "Is this the future? Or just a possibility?" The figure's light grew brighter, enveloping her. "That depends on the choices made in your time, Jessica. The future is not fixed. It is shaped by the actions of those who dare to believe in something better." The rooftop began to dissolve, the vibrant city fading into the golden light. Jessica felt the familiar pull of her body, drawing her back to the world she had left behind. Her heart raced with urgency, her mind flooded with the images of what she had seen. As the light enveloped her, she whispered, "I'll do my part. I promise." The golden light dissipated, leaving Jessica in a place that felt strangely familiar yet wholly unsettling. She was standing in a massive, circular hall, its walls adorned with symbols and writings that glowed faintly in the dim atmosphere. The ceiling stretched high above her, an intricate dome of interlocking glass panels that reflected faint, otherworldly light. At the center of the hall was a pedestal, and upon it rested an orb, pulsating gently with a rhythmic glow. Jessica's footsteps echoed as she approached the orb, her curiosity battling with a deep sense of unease. The hall was eerily silent, the kind of silence that seemed to amplify her every movement. Her gaze shifted to the glowing symbols on the walls, their patterns fluid and constantly shifting, as if alive. "What is this place?" she asked aloud, her voice cutting through the stillness. The radiant figure materialized beside her, its presence comforting despite the unease she felt. "This is the archive," it said, "a repository of humanity's collective knowledge and choices." Jessica turned to the figure, confusion etched across her face. "Choices? You mean like history?" "In part," the figure replied. "The archive holds not only the records of what has been, but also the echoes of what could have been. Every decision, every path taken or ignored, leaves an imprint here." Jessica approached the pedestal cautiously, her eyes fixed on the pulsating orb. It seemed to draw her in, its light flickering softly as though responding to her presence. "Why bring me here?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "What am I supposed to see?" The figure gestured toward the orb. "Touch it," it said, "and you will understand." Jessica hesitated, her hand hovering inches from the orb's surface. It radiated warmth, an inviting yet intimidating sensation that made her heart race. Taking a deep breath, she placed her hand on the orb. The moment her fingers made contact, the world around her shifted violently. The hall disappeared, replaced by a cascade of images and sensations that flooded her mind. She was no longer herself, no longer tethered to her body. Instead, she became a witness, a silent observer to humanity's unfolding story. The first scene unfolded before her eyes. She saw a group of people in a dense, vibrant forest. They wore simple clothes, their hands calloused from work, yet their faces glowed with purpose. They moved together in harmony, tending to the land with reverence and care. Jessica felt their connection to the earth, their understanding of its fragility and their determination to preserve it. This is what humanity was, the figure's voice echoed in her mind. A symbiosis with the world, a balance between need and nurture. The scene dissolved, replaced by another. This time, she saw cities rising, their spires reaching for the heavens. The people below moved with determination, their hands building, creating, innovating. Jessica felt their pride, their ambition, but also their growing detachment from the natural world. The land around the cities began to shrink, consumed by roads and factories. "This is what humanity became," the figure said. "A force of creation, but also of destruction." The balance was broken. Jessica's chest tightened as the scenes continued to unfold. She saw factories belching smoke into the sky, rivers choked with waste, forests leveled to make way for endless development. She felt the weight of the choices made, the irreversible scars left on the planet. "Stop," she whispered, tears streaming down her face. "Please stop." The images slowed, then faded. Jessica found herself standing in a new scene, this one quieter but no less haunting. She was in a small village, its streets lined with crumbling homes and abandoned vehicles. The people who remained were thin and weary, their eyes hollow with hunger and despair. A woman knelt by a dry well, her hands clutching a bucket as if willing water to appear. "What happened to them?" Jessica asked, her voice trembling. "They are the result of decisions made far from their lives," the figure replied. "The pursuit of wealth and convenience for some created scarcity and suffering for others. The imbalance grew until it became impossible to ignore." Jessica watched as the woman turned away from the well, her shoulders slumped in defeat. A small child ran to her, tugging at her sleeve, his wide eyes filled with questions she couldn't answer. The sight made Jessica's heart ache. "This isn't fair," she said, anger and sadness mingling in her voice. "They didn't cause this. They didn't deserve this." "Fairness has never been a guarantee," the figure said. "But the interconnectedness of humanity means that no one is untouched by the consequences of collective choices." The scene dissolved again, leaving Jessica in darkness. For a moment, she felt weightless, adrift, and uncertain. Then, a faint light appeared ahead, growing steadily brighter. As it enveloped her, she found herself in yet another scene, this one more hopeful. She was standing in a bustling community, its people working together with a sense of purpose. The buildings were modest but functional, their roofs covered with solar panels and gardens. Children played in the streets, their laughter filling the air. The land around the community was lush and green, alive with crops and wildlife. "This is what humanity could be," the figure said. "A balance rediscovered. A world rebuilt with care and intention." Jessica felt a surge of hope as she watched the scene unfold. She saw people sharing meals, teaching one another, and finding joy in the simple act of living. There was no waste here, no greed, only cooperation and respect. "How did they get here?" Jessica asked, her voice filled with wonder. "What changed?" "They chose differently," the figure replied. "They learned from the mistakes of the past and acted with foresight. They prioritized connection over division, sustainability over consumption. It was not easy, but it was possible." Jessica turned to the figure, her chest swelling with determination. "I want this future," she said firmly. "I want to help create it." The figure's light grew brighter, enveloping her once more. "Then carry this vision with you," it said. "Share it with others. Inspire them to choose differently." The path forward begins with a single step. The vibrant community began to fade, its people and places dissolving into the golden light. Jessica felt the pull of her body again, stronger this time, drawing her back to the life she had left behind. Her heart raced with urgency, her mind filled with the sights and lessons she had been shown. As the light consumed her, the figure's voice echoed in her mind. "Remember, Jessica, every choice matters. The future is not fixed, it is written with every action you take." Jessica's awareness returned gradually, the golden light dimming as her surroundings took shape. This time, she was standing in a vast space that seemed to stretch infinitely in every direction. The ground beneath her feet was smooth and reflective, like a mirror, and the air was filled with a faint hum, rhythmic and hypnotic. Above her, the sky, or what passed for a sky, shifted between hues of deep blue and silvery white, swirling like liquid metal. In the distance, she saw what appeared to be a gathering. Figures moved with purpose, their forms indistinct but clearly human. Jessica felt a strange pull toward them, an invisible thread drawing her closer. She glanced at the radiant figure beside her, its presence steady as always. "Where am I now?" she asked, her voice soft but steady. "This is the Nexus," the figure replied. "A convergence point of possibility where humanity's potential paths are debated and decided." Jessica frowned, her steps faltering. "Decided by who?" The figure gestured toward the gathering ahead. "By those who came before, those who have seen the consequences of their choices and now guide the shaping of what is to come." Jessica's curiosity outweighed her apprehension, and she continued forward. As she neared the group, their forms became clearer. They were human-like, yet their features seemed to shimmer and shift, as though they were reflections on water. Each one radiated a distinct energy, their movements graceful yet purposeful. When Jessica stepped closer, the gathering turned toward her. Their faces, ever-changing but undeniably wise, regarded her with a mixture of curiosity and understanding. One of them stepped forward, their presence commanding but not intimidating. "You are not like us," the figure said, their voice resonating in a way that felt both external and internal. "You are still tethered to the physical world." Jessica nodded, her throat tightening. I don't fully understand why I'm here." The figure tilted their head slightly, their form flickering like a candle flame. "You are here because you stand at the intersection of choice and consequence. The actions of your time will determine the paths available to those who follow." Jessica's breath hitched. "You're saying, my time is the tipping point?" "Every time is a tipping point," another voice said, this one from a figure at the edge of the group. Their tone was softer but no less firm. "But your era holds unique significance. The balance is more precarious than it has ever been." Jessica felt a wave of guilt and frustration wash over her. "I don't understand how I'm supposed to change that. I'm just one person. How can I make a difference when everything feels so overwhelming?" The first figure stepped closer, their light dimming slightly. "It is not your task alone. The future is shaped by many hands, but it begins with the willingness to act." Jessica clenched her fists, her mind racing with doubt. "But what if it's too late? What if we've already done too much damage?" A ripple passed through the gathering, their forms flickering as though responding to her words. Another figure, taller than the rest, spoke, their voice carrying an almost musical quality. "It is never too late to choose differently. The question is not whether the world can change, but whether humanity is willing to embrace that change." Jessica stared at them, her chest tightening. "And what happens if we don't? What happens if we fail?" The figures exchanged glances, their shimmering forms seeming to dim in unison. The first figure who had spoken stepped forward again, their expression somber. "You have seen glimpses of that future. A world fractured by apathy, greed, and fear. It is not inevitable, but it remains a possibility." Jessica swallowed hard, her mind flashing back to the barren wastelands, the industrial ruins, and the hollow-eyed survivors. "I don't want that future," she said, her voice trembling. "I want to help create something better, but I don't know where to start." The tallest figure raised a hand, and the reflective ground beneath them rippled like water. Images began to form in the surface: a child planting a tree in a desolate field, a group of people cleaning a polluted river, a scientist presenting a breakthrough in renewable energy. The images shifted rapidly, showing acts of kindness, innovation, and collaboration. "Start here," the figure said. "In the small moments. The choices that seem insignificant often hold the greatest power." Jessica knelt, her eyes fixed on the images as they played out before her. Each one felt like a spark, a glimmer of hope in the darkness she had witnessed. "It feels so fragile," she murmured. "Like it could break at any moment?" "It is fragile," another figure said, their voice tinged with sadness. "But that is what makes it precious. It must be nurtured, protected, and carried forward." Jessica stood, her gaze meeting the group. "And if I do this, if I take what I've learned back to my world, will it really make a difference?" The gathering seemed to brighten, their forms radiating a collective energy that pulsed in time with her heartbeat. The first figure stepped closer, their voice steady. "Every action ripples outward. You may not see the full extent of its impact, but it will matter. It always matters." Jessica nodded, her resolve hardening. "Then I'll do it. I'll try, even if it feels impossible." The figures collectively inclined their heads, a gesture of acknowledgement and respect. The tallest figure spoke once more, their voice a harmonious blend of hope and caution. "Carry this knowledge with you, Jessica. Share it. Inspire others to act, to choose differently. The path forward is not easy, but it is worth walking." The reflective ground began to ripple again, the images dissolving into golden light. The gathering slowly faded, their forms merging with the brilliance around her. Jessica felt the pull of her body return, stronger than ever, drawing her back toward the world she had left behind. As the light enveloped her, she heard their voices one last time, a chorus of wisdom and encouragement. "Remember, the future is not fixed. It is written with every choice." Jessica closed her eyes, her heart pounding with the weight of what she had seen and the hope of what she could create. The golden light consumed her completely, carrying her back toward life. Jessica felt herself being pulled through the golden light once more, her awareness shifting as the sensation of weightlessness overtook her. When the motion ceased, she was standing in a new environment, one that exuded an eerie combination of familiarity and otherworldliness. The ground beneath her feet was soft and uneven, covered in what looked like thick, blackened ash. The sky above was blanketed with rolling, gray clouds, casting the world in a dim, lifeless light. She turned slowly, her heart sinking as she took in the vast expanse around her. It was a forest, or what had once been a forest. Charred tree stumps jutted out of the ash like broken teeth, their jagged remains a stark reminder of the destruction that had taken place. The air was thick and acrid, carrying the faint metallic tang of burned earth. There was no wind, no sound, no life. "What is this place?" Jessica asked, her voice trembling as she spoke into the silence. The radiant figure materialized beside her, its light dimmer than usual, as though reflecting the sorrow of the landscape. "This is the result of neglect," it said. "A glimpse of what becomes of the natural world when humanity prioritizes exploitation over preservation." Jessica's chest tightened as she walked forward, the ash crunching softly beneath her feet. Her mind raced with questions, but one pressed itself to the forefront. "Why show me this? Haven't I already seen enough destruction?" The figure moved beside her, its presence calm but firm. "You have seen what happens when humanity turns away from its responsibilities, but this is more specific. This is what becomes of the earth itself when care is abandoned." Jessica knelt beside a charred stump, running her fingers over the rough, brittle surface. It crumbled at her touch, leaving dark smudges on her skin. "It's all gone," she whispered, her voice heavy with grief. "Everything is gone." "Not everything," the figure replied. "Life is resilient, but its resilience is not infinite. It requires time, protection, and intentional care. Without those, even the strongest ecosystems will collapse." Jessica stood, her gaze scanning the horizon. In the distance, she noticed something, a faint glow, small and almost imperceptible against the ashen backdrop. She pointed toward it. "What's that?" The figure turned, its light flickering slightly. "Go and see." Jessica hesitated before moving toward the glow, her steps slow and cautious. As she drew closer, the glow became clearer. It was a single sapling, its delicate green leaves shimmering faintly in the dim light. The contrast between the vibrant, fragile life of the sapling and the desolation around it was striking. She knelt beside the sapling, her heart swelling with a mixture of hope and despair. "How is this still here?" she asked. "It survived," the figure said simply. "A testament to the power of nature, even in the face of devastation. But it will not thrive alone." Jessica reached out to touch one of the leaves, her fingers brushing against its soft surface. "What does it need?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Care," the figure replied. "Protection." Jessica stared at the sapling, its glow steady and persistent despite the desolation surrounding it. "But one sapling can't bring back a forest," she said, tears stinging her eyes. "It's not enough." "It is a beginning," the figure said. "Every great change begins with a single step, a single act of faith. This sapling is a symbol of that, a reminder that even in the darkest times, hope can take root." Jessica's hand trembled as she withdrew it, her heart heavy with the weight of the moment. "It feels so fragile," she said. "Like it could be destroyed at any moment." "It is fragile," the figure agreed. "And that is why it must be nurtured. But fragility is not weakness. It is the beginning of strength." Jessica stood, her gaze lingering on the sapling. She wanted to believe the figure's words, but the devastation around her made it difficult. The idea of rebuilding felt overwhelming, impossible. "What happens if no one cares for it?" she asked, her voice trembling. "What if it withers and dies like everything else?" The figure's light dimmed slightly, its tone somber. "Then the cycle begins again, and the opportunity for renewal is lost, until another moment arises, if it arises." Jessica swallowed hard, her throat tightening. "And if someone does care for it? Then it grows," the figure said simply. "And as it grows, it inspires others to plant, to tend, to protect. The forest returns, one tree at a time." Jessica stared at the sapling, the faint glow of its leaves a beacon in the desolate landscape. She felt a surge of determination rise within her, a quiet but powerful resolve. "I don't want this to be the future," she said firmly. "I don't want the world to end up like this." The figure moved beside her, its presence steady and supportive. "Then carry this vision with you," it said. "Let it guide your actions and inspire those around you. The choices you make will shape the world for generations to come." Jessica nodded, her chest tightening with emotion. "I'll try," she said. "But it feels so overwhelming, like I'll never be able to do enough." "You are not alone," the figure said. "Change is not the responsibility of one person, but of many. Your role is to begin, to spark the change and trust that others will join you." The words settled over Jessica, their weight both comforting and daunting. She took one last look at the sapling before stepping back, the faint glow imprinted in her mind. The landscape around her began to shift, the ashen ground rippling like water. The sapling remained steady, its glow unwavering as the world dissolved into golden light. Jessica felt the pull of her body once more, stronger this time, tugging her back toward the life she had left behind. Her heart raced with urgency, her mind filled with the lessons she had been shown. As the light enveloped her, the figure's voice echoed in her mind. "Remember, Jessica, even the smallest act can ignite a movement. Hope begins with you." The golden light grew brighter, carrying her away from the desolation and back toward the world she had known. The golden light receded, and Jessica found herself standing on a bustling street corner. The contrast between this scene and the previous desolation was so stark it left her momentarily breathless. People filled the sidewalks, their faces animated with purpose, laughter, and conversation. The hum of life surrounded her, street vendors calling out, children chasing each other in a nearby park, and the gentle hum of electric vehicles gliding quietly along the roads. This wasn't the same dreary, polluted city she had seen earlier in her journey. The air was clean, the buildings alive with greenery. Solar panels lined rooftops, and vertical gardens climbed the sides of skyscrapers, spilling over with vibrant flowers and lush foliage. The streets were wide and pedestrian-friendly, with designated bike lanes filled with people cycling joyfully. Jessica's heart lifted as she took in the scene. "This is beautiful," she whispered. The radiant figure appeared beside her, its light blending harmoniously with the brightness of the scene. "This is another possibility," it said, "a future shaped by collective effort and intentional change." Jessica stepped forward, her gaze sweeping over the details. She noticed small kiosks along the sidewalks where people refilled reusable water bottles, stations for composting and recycling integrated seamlessly into the urban design. In the distance, a drone hovered quietly, delivering a package to a rooftop garden. "How did this happen?" Jessica asked, turning to the figure. "How did they get it so right here, when it went so wrong in the other futures I saw?" The figure gestured toward the city. "It began with choices, small ones, made by individuals who believed in something greater than themselves. Their actions inspired others, creating a ripple effect that expanded outward. Over time, those ripples grew into waves, reshaping the systems that govern society." Jessica watched as a group of people gathered around an outdoor community garden, their hands digging into the soil as they planted rows of vegetables. Children helped, their laughter mingling with the sound of birdsong. "They're working together," she said, her voice tinged with wonder. "It's like everyone understands they're part of something bigger." "They do," the figure said. "This is a society that values collaboration over competition, sustainability over consumption. They have learned to see the interconnectedness of their actions." Jessica's eyes fell on a woman standing by a kiosk, holding up a small device and explaining its use to a group of curious bystanders. The device emitted a soft glow, and Jessica could hear snippets of her explanation about renewable energy storage and decentralized power grids. The crowd listened intently, their faces lit with curiosity and hope. "What about leadership?" Jessica asked. "Did they have someone, like a visionary or a hero, who led the charge?" The figure's light flickered slightly. Leadership played a role, but this future was not built by one person or even a small group. It was the collective realization of humanity's potential. Leaders emerged, yes, but they served as facilitators, empowering others rather than commanding them. Jessica thought about the sapling she had seen in the wasteland, its fragile beauty standing as a symbol of hope. "So, it's like that sapling," she murmured. "Someone planted the first seed, and then others joined in, nurturing it until it grew into something bigger." "Precisely," the figure said. "Every great change begins with a single action, but it takes many hands to sustain it." Jessica's gaze was drawn to a nearby park where a group of teenagers was organizing a cleanup event. They were collecting litter, sorting it into bins, and repurposing materials for art projects. A young girl held up a colorful mural made of discarded plastic, the design depicting a thriving ocean teeming with life. "It's like they're rewriting the story," Jessica said, her voice filled with awe. "Turning the things that once caused harm into something beautiful." The figure inclined its head. "That is the essence of transformation. To take what is broken and reshape it into something whole." Jessica continued walking, the city unfolding around her like a tapestry of possibility. She noticed a school where children were learning outdoors, surrounded by gardens and solar-powered learning stations. She passed a clinic offering free health services, powered entirely by renewable energy. Everywhere she looked, she saw harmony between people, between technology, and between humanity and the earth. But as she admired the scene, a thought nagged at the back of her mind. "What about the rest of the world?" she asked. "It's amazing here, but what if there are places that didn't make it? What if this city is an exception, not the rule?" The figure's light dimmed slightly, its tone thoughtful. "Not all places achieve change at the same pace. Some regions adapt more quickly, while others face greater challenges. But in this future, those who have found balance extend their knowledge and resources to those who struggle. They understand that no one thrives unless all do." Jessica's heart swelled with both hope and responsibility. "So, it's about lifting each other up," she said. "Not just focusing on one place but working together as a global community." "Exactly," the figure said. "This future exists because humanity chose unity over division, compassion over indifference." They recognized that their survival depended on their connection to one another. As Jessica walked, she noticed a large digital display on the side of a building. It wasn't an advertisement or news ticker but a live feed showing the city's environmental metrics: air quality, water usage, energy consumption, and waste reduction. The numbers were encouraging, a transparent reminder of the progress they were making together. "It's like they're holding themselves accountable," Jessica observed. "They are," the figure said. "Accountability is not a burden but a shared commitment to a better future. Transparency fosters trust, and trust strengthens community." Jessica stopped, her eyes scanning the vibrant, thriving cityscape. "This feels so far from where we are now," she said quietly. "Almost impossible." The figure's light grew brighter, its voice steady. "It is not impossible, Jessica. It is difficult, yes, and requires perseverance, but it is within humanity's reach. The question is not whether it can be done but whether the will exists to begin." Jessica thought about her own life, the choices she had made, the times she had felt powerless in the face of the world's problems. She felt the weight of those moments now, but also the hope that came with understanding their importance. "I want to believe we can get there," she said. "I want to believe it's not too late." "It is not too late," the figure said. "But the time to act is now." The path to this future begins with a single choice. A choice to care, to create, to connect. Jessica nodded, her resolve hardening. "Then I'll start. I'll do what I can to make this future possible." The city began to dissolve around her, its vibrant streets and lush greenery fading into the golden light. Jessica felt the pull of her body growing stronger, drawing her back toward the life she had left behind. Her heart raced, her mind filled with the lessons she had learned and the visions she had seen. As the light enveloped her completely, the figure's voice echoed one last time. "Remember, Jessica, the future is built not by wishing but by doing. Every action matters." And with that, the light carried her away.